Hey everybody, welcome back to the next episode of the Legacy Liftoff podcast by Drone Guy. I'm your host Cody Retlick, and today with me is Kevin Morris, otherwise known as the FAA Drone Guy. Kevin, thanks for being here today, man. I appreciate it.
Hey, anytime we get to hang out and talk about drones or anything else aviation related, I'm in.
Right? Well, absolutely. And today we get to talk a little bit even more about, obviously drones and that and whatnot, but learn a little bit more about you because that's what the Legacy Liftoff podcast is really all about, is just sharing those stories of people doing some awesome things in the industry. So today very fortunate and love to have you on and kind of hear your story because you've been, I think, in aviation for quite some time and had the love for aviation, and just excited to hear the story for sure. And I think I got to share one story because of how we got connected. I think it was very random, like the most random connection I think I've ever had with someone of, right? Like you connected with our CTO on Facebook buying something at a marketplace, and just Jan, our CTO, reached out. He's like, "Hey, do you know Kevin Morris, the FAA Drone Guy? I'm connected with him from Facebook." I was like, "Oh, I know of him. I've seen his stuff, but I know." Yeah, Jan was like, "Right, I'm giving it to him for free. Let's just talk to him. We'll just connect." I was like, "Let's just do that." I'm like, "I love it. Let's do it." So, one of the more random ways to meet someone, but hey, you never know, right?
Yep,
Uh,
yep, absolutely. I think that's one of the really interesting and exciting things about the drone industry in itself is you don't have to be by an airport to run into a fellow aviator. They're kind of out there everywhere now, and so yeah, that was really unique, kind of funny. My wife got a big kick out of the whole story too, so it was a good chance encounter.
Right. And that, hey, you gotta seize those moments when you have those chance encounters, because you never know, who you're gonna meet and where. So it's great. But all right, so I would love to hear kind of your beginning, like story of how you got into aviation, how you started, in the industry. Did you have that love for aviation as a kid growing up, or like did you have a spark early on that was like, "Hey, I love airplanes," or "I love aviation"? If you could kind of give us that first initial love for it, or how you got into it, that would be a great place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as with a lot of people in aviation, it's sort of just within your DNA, so to speak. It's something that from my earliest memories as a child, I've always been fascinated with airplanes and aviation from just my youngest age. My father served in the Navy. He was an aviation electrician's mate on board an aircraft carrier, and he worked on aircraft. My next door neighbor's dad just happened to also be in the Navy, where he flew E2s off the carrier. So we kind of had this aviation thing with my friend next door and myself just from the youngest age. And so it was kind of one of those things where as you go through school and a lot of people are like, what do you want to be when you grow up? That's the question kids get all the time in middle school and getting into high school. And their answers might differ. I was locked in and I'm going to be a pilot. Absolutely 100% going to be a pilot. So for my earliest days, it was, I'm going to be a pilot. There's no question about it. I'm going to go do it.
Love it. Hey, that's and some people, kudos to you, because some people, hey, I said I wanted to be an architect when I was young, and that did not happen. I didn't have the skills nor the knowledge for it, and I couldn't draw, so it was like, it's not the route for me. But it's awesome to see just kind of how you had stuck with it. You really just had that passion from an early on age. And so you went to St. Cloud as well, right? Then for aviation. Um, so what was your goal going into it, as well as then like coming out? It's like, hey, did you want to be a commercial pilot? Did you want to fly for military? What was your thoughts on, hey, because there's a lot of careers, right, in obviously aviation, but where did you see yourself being, and what kind of route were you hoping to go down?
Well, I think as a kid growing up and as you're looking to your schooling and you're looking to your future, you you look to certain things that drive you. And for me it was we took some trips when I was younger, and you talked about me being in aviation. While I definitely have a lot of gray hair, I have been around a while. I'm about to date myself even further. We used to fly in Western Airlines quite a bit, and we'd go out and visit my family friends in California. And you see the pilots walking through the terminal, dragging their bags with their uniform and the epaulets and the hat. And to me, that was like, I'm going to be an airline pilot. Interestingly enough, as I started down that pathway, I got my private pilot certificate when I was in high school, and then went up to St. Cloud State University where they had an aviation program. I wasn't so deadlocked at that point of being an airline pilot anymore. I was really looking at a lot of different options. I was thinking maybe I want to do corporate aviation. I looked at the military for quite a while, and this was, of course, I went to college in the mid '90s, and there weren't exactly a lot of military pilot jobs available in the mid '90s. So that avenue kind of closed down for me, and so then I went back and stayed with the civilian side, and ended up flight instructing for a while and then getting hired at the airline. So for me, I guess I kind of started with I want to be an airline pilot. I had a bit of a detour maybe in the middle with my thought process, but then in the end came right back and ended up being an airline pilot.
Nice. I mean, that's all of us, right? There's some little detour or bump or thoughts, or the squirrel that you're looking at of like, oh, that could be cool, right? Or that could be fun, or kind of figuring out that path and knowing really truly what would make you happy, right? And want to continuously work at it in your career. And so give us that kind of transition then of like, hey, you graduated, right? You got hired at the airlines. Was it I might butcher. Is it Masaba? Is it
That's
Masaba
correct.
Airlines? Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So you were at Masaba. You did some flight instructing as well, some other areas. How did that kind of transition, or where did you go from graduating to where you're at today with the FAA? Can you kind of give us those stories in between there?
Yeah.
I know there's a timeline there, but obviously, uh, give us the cliff notes in some ways.
Yeah, and I was going to point out, you notice at this point in none of my sort of goals and career aspirations did you hear me say, and I'm going to work for the FAA someday. And I don't mean that as a knock to my employer. I love working for the FAA, but I think the FAA, where I ultimately ended up, isn't exactly where people think they're going to go right away. But depending on how your career progresses and what happens in life, sometimes working for the FAA is the right choice. But let me back up way before that. So you graduate from college, university, or flight school. You have this gap in experience, right? The FAA certificates you as a commercial pilot, says you can go out and be paid to be a pilot, but not too many people are going to hire you, especially at that time in the airlines. You're not going to walk in the front door of an airline with 500 hours and say, I'd like to be a first officer. So flight instructing is what a lot of us did during that time, and still today, to make up the gap in hours and experience. So you go out and you flight instruct. And I flight instructed for a couple years at a local airport in Crystal, Minnesota, which is just to the northwest of downtown Minneapolis. I flight instructed there for a couple years, earning my hours and getting some additional flight instructor ratings. And then I was applying. As soon as I became eligible hours wise, I began applying at a lot of different airlines. And back then, this would have been in the late '90s, hiring was pretty competitive. It's still competitive today, but it was one of those things where they have 10 openings and 300 people apply. So you're really just doing your best to get hired anywhere you can to start getting paid to fly airplanes where you're not teaching, right? You're finally landing in that real pilot job. And so I was fortunate enough to have Masaba Airlines reach out to me with an offer. I went in, I interviewed, and sat down next to, I think there were 15 other people interviewing, three of which were women. And I would say that all 12 of us guys looked almost identical. We must have read all the same interview tip guides. We had the same color suit, same color tie, same everything, almost the same haircuts. And we went in and interviewed, and I was fortunate enough to be hired by Masaba Airlines in 1999. And Masaba, of course, operated as a regional airline for Northwest Airlines at that time. They flew two different aircraft. They flew a Saab 340, which is a twin engine turboprop, seats about 34 people. And they also flew a Bach 146 regional jet, which was oddly enough, a four-engine high-wing jet that seats about 80 people or so, depending on configuration. So in my career at Masaba Airlines, I was lucky enough to be a first officer or co-pilot on the Bach 146, flew into Aspen, Colorado, did some really fun stuff in that aircraft. And then I transitioned when I upgraded to a captain to the Saab 340.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, I unfortunately don't know as much about all the airplanes, but I they sound cool. They sound right. They sound like they would be fun airplanes to operate in a lot of different ways. And it's something that I guess I've seen. I've been to EA. Have you ever been to EAA? I'm assuming you have, right? In Oshkosh,
Yeah,
the one of the largest air shows. I'm sure you're familiar with it, right? Have you ever been to EAA?
I'm not. I'm not sure if I'm getting a bad connection on my end, Cody, or not. But
Oh,
I
that one.
missed your
Okay.
question after I've been to EAA. Yes, I've
No, yeah,
definitely been to
that was it.
EAA.
I was like, I've the only my only experience with, crazy amounts of different airplanes, and obviously this isn't really the commercial side of things, right? But a lot of private flying and whatnot at EAA, there's just you get exposed to so many of those. I was just asking if you've ever been to EAA before in Oshkosh.
Yeah, I've been to EAA. I was fortunate enough. Interestingly enough, I did not go to EAA sort of on my own. It was one of those things that was always on my to-do list. I think for every pilot, going to EAA Oshkosh is on your to-do list. But it's one of those things that I fortunately got the opportunity to go to when I was with the FAA out of the Minneapolis Flight Standards District Office, where I was the Fast Team Program Manager. And as part of my job with that role, I went to EAA a couple of years, and couple of years, I walked around as much as I could. I still don't think I've seen much more than half
Yeah,
of
it's
EAA.
massive.
It's huge.
Yeah, the only reason why I ask is I live like 30 minutes away from there. And we had a drone cage there for a couple years that I did some instructing and some classes and teaching and stuff, and then unfortunately they got rid of it. But it's just, yeah, it's an awesome for anyone in aviation. It's just an amazing spot to be for sure. So you get hired at Masaba. You do that for a few years, right? And then what kind of led you to that next path of that next career move for you after being a pilot there for a while?
Well, and it's a great question because I think that's going to happen. I feel like to anyone in any career at some point. At some point you're going to take a look at the career that you're in, the dream career, or the only thing you could ever imagine doing, and maybe your life has changed a bit. Maybe your tastes have changed. Your goals might change. You might now have a family, and now you're transitioning to some different goals. The industry itself might change. For aviation, it was a massive shift in how it looked and how it operated after 9/11.
Hmm.
It was almost like a different industry in terms of lifestyle and the way things worked pre 9/11 to post 9/11. So the industry changed quite a bit. Flying the aircraft, that job didn't really change, but almost everything surrounding it did. So with that change, with the fact that I had a family and I was looking at some different things, I was a reserve captain at that time, based in Detroit. So I was commuting from Minneapolis to Detroit quite a bit,
Oh wow.
working every weekend. I flew for Misabi Airlines for just over 7 years. I don't know that I had a weekend off in those 7 years, and I'm almost certain I never had a holiday like Christmas off in those 7 years. And so you kind of take a look at it and say, I love flying airplanes. It's great. I still love flying airplanes, but maybe I can do something else and still fly airplanes and still have a pretty good life based on what's changed for me. So it was right around that time, I would say about 2006, 2007, where I started looking for a change. And as a pilot, when you are looking to change, it's not like you fit into a lot of molds. You're a bit of a square peg out there because
Yeah.
you know how to fly airplanes. But that doesn't mean you know how to run a company. It doesn't mean you know how to do marketing or business or all these other things that happen to be open at the time for jobs. So the FAA seemed like a natural fit. I was also at that time a lacrosse referee. I was an NCAA and high school men's lacrosse referee. So rules and understanding rules it was sort of natural to me. So the FAA seemed like a natural fit. So I applied and was lucky enough to be hired in Minneapolis at the Minneapolis field office as an inspector.
Nice. Well, that's cool. I never played lacrosse, but I've always wanted to. It feels like a fun sport to play as well. But um so yeah, I mean, you're right next to your home then, right? Like you were living in Minneapolis at that time, so it was kind of a an awesome opportunity for you, right? To kind of get into continuously into your passion there in the aviation industry, but right in your backyard, which is an awesome way to still continue to grow that career. But you came in as an aviation inspector, right, or a safety inspector.
Yes.
How did we get to the point of to where you're now known as the FAA Drone Guy?
So here we come to the next weird turn in my career, right? The first one was transitioning from an airline pilot into the FAA, and the second one was transitioning from a traditional type aircraft guy into the FAA drone guy. So I've been with the FAA for about 17 years now. I started in the mid 2000s, and as you pointed out, originally I was an aviation safety inspector, and that's a pretty common entryway for aircraft pilots or aircraft mechanics. You come in at the inspector level. You're assigned to a field office or a certificate management office, depending, and you do oversight. So you do surveillance and check rides and different things like that, investigations, enforcements. And I did that for a number of years. And it's a great way to be exposed to not only how the FAA works, but how the rules are applied. And this becomes very important as I transition into drones later on. I've always been interested in safety, in understanding the rules and helping other people be safe when they're flying aircraft. So it's one of those things that transitioned easily for me once I got into the aviation inspector role into different things. Now, my pathway to get to drones was a little bit different. So when you get hired at the FAA, you're either a general aviation safety inspector or you're an air carrier, airline safety inspector. Because I was a pilot for an airline, they put me into the air carrier side. Eventually, I transitioned to the general aviation side where I started to do aircraft accident investigations. So for about 3 or so years, I was an aircraft accident investigator in the Minneapolis FISDO, where that's what I would do. I'd go out, I had a team that I'd go out with, and we would go look at aircraft accidents and assist the NTSB in determining probable cause, and certainly for us at the FAA addressing our issues, like was there traffic involved, was there a nav aid involved, it was an airport thing, and it was really really interesting work. And I started to notice that a lot of the accidents I was seeing, fortunately most of them were not fatal accidents, could have easily been prevented. Rarely is the cause of an accident mechanical failure. Most of the time it's pilot decision making. And so I started to think, well, how can I help those pilots before I go take a look at their broken airplane? How can I get to them before? And that's where I came up with an opportunity to work with the FAA safety team or the FAST team. So that's my transition into the FAST team, which was really the start of my drone stuff in the FAA, because I got into the FAST team. We're doing a lot of work with traditional aircraft, doing a lot of seminars and safety presentations. But I noticed this thing over here on the side, this buzzing, if you will, right? And I was like, what's happening here? And that was when drones, as we know them today, really started to, uh, bad pun incoming, take off, right?
Yep.
So
Always. The
it,
classic
it
pun.
yeah, it was something that was like, well, no, drones or unmanned aircraft, as we call them in the FAA, have been around a long, long time. When I was a kid and with my neighbor, my neighbor built RC aircraft, and he would take us out, and we would get to fly little Piper Cub balsa model aircraft around. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was technically flying a drone. It was an
Yeah.
unmanned aircraft, and I was operating it. And what was changing was the availability of them.
Yep.
No longer were you confined into a basement or a workshop to build these aircraft where they're fixed wing and engines, and you had to understand lift, thrust, weight, drag, and you put all this sweat equity into this RC aircraft. So if you went out and crashed it, you were really out a lot of your time. Now you can, at that time, you could walk into a store, buy it off the shelf, sync it to your phone, and you're flying.
Right.
And I thought two things. One, there is a huge opportunity here for the FAA to communicate and partner and ensure that we're all doing this together safely. And then the second thing was, I'll bet you most of these drone pilots don't even understand how the FAA works or why we're involved. And so, what I wanted to do was sort of eliminate that lack of knowledge of what is the FAA, what does it do, why do I care, and also to start building partnerships from the ground up. I looked at it as manned aviation has been working with the FAA for over 100 years almost, right? We were called something different in the 50s, I think the CAA, but anyway, the FAA as its body has been around for quite a while. Drone pilots were relatively new. This was a brand new industry. It was the sun was just rising on this industry, and I thought this is the perfect time to establish relationships, to get together, to work together to ensure safety. That way, when we start to integrate drones, because as we all know, drones are a big part of the future of aviation, that we're
Mhm.
all in this together right from the start. And so that's where I took the turn and started to focus a little bit more even on drones when I was with the Minneapolis FISDO.
Yeah, and I think that's important because, like, hey, like you mentioned before, I mean, it was kind of the Wild Wild West in the beginning, right? I mean, obviously you had, the part 233, and you had then the advance of the part 107 and getting into that and whatnot. But most important thing, is that ultimately we're working together because we are both in the sky, right? We're both using obviously airspace and knowing restrictions and understanding that, hey, we have to be in cohesion to understand what's going on and how we're sharing this airspace, because safety is obviously number one concern, and it should be the number one concern. For any drone pilot out there is, hey, can I fly safe? The number one thing that obviously you always like to do immediately, even to this day, when we get a new job or anything, check airspace, right? Like, know
Yeah,
exactly where I'm flying as soon as you get the opportunity, because you got to know, right? If you need to
right.
put in authorization or if you need a waiver, and as you know, some of that takes time, and you guys have gotten a lot better over the years too of facilitating that, and knowing how we can all be safe. But I would love to kind of, then talk about, so you came into the drone, so you started really on the drone side. What year was that where you started to, like, all right, drones are really starting to come onto the scene, and that's where you kind of started to focus a little bit more on the drone side? What year around was that?
So I want to say that was probably right around 2015. It was a couple years before Part 107
Okay.
came out. And it was, you mentioned it's nostalgia a little bit. You mentioned the 333 exemptions and the 336 stuff, and it's kind of, you mentioned the airspace authorizations. We won't talk about how airspace authorizations went early on. We'll skip over that part. But I
Wait,
think
you had to do those? I'm just kidding.
no,
Right? It's crazy.
fortunately, I didn't have to do those, but I heard about them.
Mhm.
I heard everyone coming at me and being like, "What? It takes me 3 months to get an authorization. That's not how drone in this industry works." And so, sidetrack. I'm glad we've come a long way on that one. But
For sure.
yeah, I definitely started to get interested in the safety aspect of it and communicating that. In fact, uh, notoriously within the FAA, notoriously, I produced a YouTube video, and I think it was just about 3 hours long, which in the hindsight of everything I know now, looking back at it, was quite insane to think that anybody would ever watch a 3 hour YouTube video. But when Part 107 came out, I read through it and it immediately made perfect sense to me. And I quickly realized that it makes perfect sense to me because I've been with the FAA at this point for a good 6 or 7 years. I knew how to read regs because I was a flight instructor. I've had my nose in the FAA rulebook my entire life. So it clearly makes sense to me. But I realized it probably is almost a foreign language to drone pilots out there. And so I thought, well, maybe the best thing to do is just put on a webinar and record it on YouTube. I think it's still out there if you want to see the FAA Drone Guy in his very earliest appearance. But walk them through the regulations one at a time and explain what they mean. And when the FAA regulations are written, how do you read that as a pilot? Because I can tell you how the FAA looks at it. And so if I can communicate that effectively to a drone pilot, then they'll help. It helps them understand the rules as well. And then we at least have a common ground to work from. And so I made that video, and it caught the attention of a few different people in the FAA, who, my understanding now, maybe behind closed doors, was like, who is this guy? What is he doing? Who told me he could do this? And I'm just a nobody in the Minneapolis FISDO recording a video trying to help drone pilots. That really started my pathway towards where I am today. I did that video, and eventually flight standards at the headquarters level say, hey, this guy knows a lot about drones. Maybe we should bring him in, and he can help us do some things. And so I worked on a lot of policy and rules, especially for recreational flyers, Part 107 type stuff. The advisory circular that everybody waited for years for it to come out, 9157 Charlie, I think it was at the time. I was writing that. I wrote that. I was moving it through clearance, and it's something that it was insanely frustrating at times, but we got that out. Then I started working. I was one of the lead team members on the trust when the trust came out. So I helped write the trust. So now I know where to send your hate mail if you took it and you didn't like it. But I helped write the trust and get that out there, and develop how it's going to work, how it's going to be made available. Can you fail it? All that type of stuff were decisions that my team and I made, and worked through that. And eventually the Office of Communications at the FAA, which I didn't really know much about most of my FAA career, reached out to me and said, hey, you've got a unique ability to communicate with an audience, take a very complex subject that's written in almost a foreign language and make it understandable. We'd like to have you join our team. And I sat there for a minute thinking, I didn't go to school for communications. I'm not, a social media guru. I'm not a digital guy. I'm not a public affairs specialist, but I can learn. And this seems new and exciting and challenging, and I get to do more with drones. And so I said, okay, I'll do it. And they said, oh yeah, by the way, we're calling you the FAA Drone Guy. I said, you're calling me what? They're like, you're going to be the FAA Drone Guy. We're going to put you all over our social. We're going to have you at events. It's going to be great. And I said, all right, I'm in your hands. Let's do this thing. I'm all in. And that's how I ended up becoming the FAA Drone Guy. I didn't pick the name for myself. I didn't sell myself as the FAA Drone Guy. The Office of Communications bestowed it upon me. Says, this is you. We're going to make it work.
You were the chosen one for the name that was so eloquently bestowed upon you, right? It's like, all right, you're the guy. But not until after you accept. Then we're going to tell you that you're the guy, right? But I mean, that's an awesome story to kind of, paint the way of how you got into it. Because, I mean, at the time, and a lot of people argue even to this day, is like Part 107 was one of the biggest advancements, obviously, from the FAA's perspective to help remote pilots become certified and fly commercially, right? And it's it is true too, because even to this day, it's so many people that is like, hey, what is, how do you read a sectional chart, and why do I need to know about wind and weather and all of this information that obviously aviation pilots, that's what you are living, breathing, everything when you're going through, flight school and trying to become an actual manned pilot. But from a drone perspective, people oftentimes forget that it's like, hey, we're sharing the airspace, so this is why you need to know these things. But I think yourself and a lot of others now to this day in the education sector have been able to speak it more in layman's terms, to understand that, reading all the acronyms and the letters and the everything else, the terms that oftentimes is put out by the FAA is a lot, and it's tough for some people. But I've not watched all of your 3-hour video, but I know I've seen a lot of parts of that video throughout the years. Early on in the days of Part 107 coming out, I definitely watched a good amount of it. We'll have to find that and link it in the show notes for people.
don't torture your viewers. But
Just, give them some cliff note or something, right?
yeah.
Just,
But that's it's just it's something that it's kind of like my passion has just kept growing for drones this entire time. It's the part 107, that 3 hour video, and becoming kind of the FAA drone guy and going to events and talking with people. It's I feel like the partnership, or at least the understanding between the operators such as yourself and the FAA, we understand that relationship, and we know that we can benefit from that relationship in moving forward. It's one of those things where I remember when Part 107 came out, I was being invited to a lot of different online groups, Facebook groups and different types of groups. And I would get in there and I'd see these threads, 60 plus comments long, with everybody opining on what this really meant. And nobody was really close. And so I'd jump in and I'd say, this is exactly what it means. And of course, I'd take a lot of flack, because anytime you post anything online, you take a lot of flack. But and I just keep
always going to
going
be
and
some
trying to
troll.
educate and get people to understand, like, I know what you think it means, but this is exactly what the FAA is telling you it means. And what I've seen since those early days, so this was maybe in 2019-ish, 2020, where 107 had come out, but it was still pretty new, that now you guys take care of that. It's really amazing to watch. And that was kind of my goal, was to have safety, understanding, cooperation organically develop from the operators. It's not just
Yep.
me with an FA thing behind me and wearing an FA shirt saying, you're going to do this, because people don't respond to that necessarily well all the time. But if Cody sits here and tells you a few things like, hey, you got to check airspace, people are going to listen. And that was kind of always my goal. Folks such as yourself, and there's others that are out there that become pretty well known in the drone community, is, hey, when they type something, that's the way it is, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I was always striving towards. It wasn't so that I could be, trolling in Facebook groups and responding to hundreds of comments. It was, I'm going to get these guys to understand what safety means and why it's important, and understand what the FAA is and why we do what we do, so that organically it can happen. I can shut my computer down, go on vacation for 2 weeks, come back, open it up. And folks like yourself are providing concrete, absolutely correct answers to folks with really good drone questions. I feel like that's where we are today. So that has been a
Yeah.
huge, I don't take ownership in that accomplishment, but seeing that happen gives me a big sense of pride.
I mean, you definitely started the charge though, and that's how to build community and to build collaboration, is ultimately having that trust in others, right, inside of the industry and the community, to just, hey, if so and so, whoever it is, you trust them and you understand that, like, okay, they know what they're doing, they've done it, they're not telling me I have to 100% do this, they're giving me the guidance and the tools and the knowledge to just make sure that I'm abiding by the rules and safety regulations and everything else, then ultimately people are going to get behind that and they're going to want to do the right thing, right? I mean, you can see it in every single Facebook group out there for drone pilots and drone community, is if there's someone doing something wrong, right? It's very well known of, like, hey, why are we doing this? Let's be better, let's move
Yeah.
forward, and ultimately not put a bad mark on the industry. And you got to manage the rule, not the exception, right? But in your case, in the FAA, you have to manage the exceptions sometimes, right? And that's why I think you've continued to advance now regulations in certain ways, and whatnot, with remote ID, and we have Lance now, and you mentioned, like, the trust throughout the years, all of these culminations of where we are today. What would you say is, like, the biggest advancement from the FAA, of integrating drones and the drone community and industry into the aviation world?
I think my answer here is going to make a few of my colleagues very happy to hear in the FAA, and I'll probably get some angry emails from some other ones on this one. But hey, what's the fun without a little controversy, right?
Right?
My answer to that would be Lance. It would be the airspace authorization capability. And we go back, and I mentioned it, like we're not going to speak about it again, but we might as well speak about it because it happened. We all know it. Those early days of trying to comply with the reg, which is, hey, if you're operating in this type of airspace, you've got to have an airspace authorization. And what does that really mean? And how do we get it? We had an idea of how we thought it was going to work, but making that happen was a bit of a challenge. And where we started was almost unanimously despised by the drone industry, the process we had in place, because it just didn't work. You couldn't get a request, hey, I need you to shoot this bridge or this structure or something like that. We're going to do that next week. I'll give you a 3-day window. And then you come back and say, well, I need a 90-day lead time
Yeah,
for the FAA to get my authorization. It was what we had at the time. We weren't thrilled about it either, but we were trying to sort of make this thing happen on the side, which ended up being Lance, and it became
yep.
an automated process. And I think Lance, through the years, has continued to develop. I almost feel like, for as much hatred as there was for the previous airspace authorization process, I feel like there's almost an equal amount of love for Lance.
For
I
sure.
think people finally are able to say, yes, FAA, this is how the drone industry works. We need near real time authorizations. We need access to the airspace. Then we flip the switch to allow it to happen at night. So we're seeing a lot of advancements. So to me, in terms of safety, operational excellence, efficiency in the airspace, keeping our national airspace system the safest in the world. I feel like Lance has probably been the best development for drones. And I know I have friends in rulemaking. I have
you're
I have friends that do a lot of
gonna,
work
you're
with
definitely
still
gonna
with
get some people.
with the trust. Those are all good things too. But I think when you're talking about safely integrating drones, Lance is phenomenal in
Yep.
doing that.
And I completely agree with you. I think it also just took the thought process of anybody trying to not get authorizations prior, that is just like, well, I'm not going to get this for 90 days. Like, I'm just going to do it anyway. Right. Like, people it just bred that ability to rule break and just kind of go for it because, like, well, I should just do it because it's an opportunity and you got to make money, and people had their livelihood in some ways. So I 100% agree with you. It's the best jump in advancement of what we've had so far. I think in some ways, to keep everybody safe and flying safe, which is ultimately the number one goal for sure.
Well, good.
Um,
You and I can go down together on that decision then.
that's fine. I wanted to, I'll be on your back there, just going down with you because I agree. You'll probably get some flack, but it's okay. I think they'll understand and hopefully agree at some points that we're right there. But so remote ID. There's one of the last things I want to touch on too is obviously that's kind of been a big thing here that has been released, or earlier this year. How's it going so far? Would you say from your end and the FAA on that with the implementation of remote ID? And you just want to speak a little bit of how that all kind of came about, or how it's been going so far since it's been rolled out.
Yeah, remote ID is a phrase or a name that you can say that will instantly divide a crowd.
Hmm.
If you go to conferences or seminars or anything like that, and you start talking about remote ID, you're going to have some people that are fully on board with you, and then you're going to have some people that, if they had rocks, they'd throw them at you. So it's definitely a dividing thing. When I look at remote ID, I look at it not just, hey, we're doing this to drones, but I look at it more in terms of the big picture and where we ultimately want to be with drones. I think where we are today with drones is a good start. I don't feel that we're really anywhere near our end game with drones at this point. I think the capabilities are going to continue to increase. I think their uses, their benefits to society are going to continue to increase. So we're really sort of still in this getting started, getting moving phase. And when I look at remote ID in that regard, it makes a lot of sense. We have to have a way to continue to integrate drones safely when we get into the concept of beyond visual line of sight, when we start getting into the concept of drone delivery in the sense that the consumer thinks it's going to happen. Open up my phone, hit an app, 20 minutes later, drone drops it off, and then drone flies away. We'll get there, but it's going to take some work and some coordination and collaboration to make that happen. And remote ID is one of those things. So we've got there's a security element, of course, to remote ID. Our law enforcement partners, the FAA, it helps them identify operators that maybe should be operating in certain areas, or investigations if somebody does something with the drone they're not supposed to do. But also from a safety component as well, it's going to allow us to facilitate drones operating as part maybe of our detect and avoid capability or command and control. It's gonna all feed into this ultimately. So the challenge then is getting the average drone pilot that maybe says, I'm just gonna fly my drone recreationally. Why do I need remote ID? To
Hmm.
sort of step back and see a bigger picture of, it's not just you with your drone in your backyard. It's you operating an aircraft is part of thousands of other aircraft that are operating in the National Airspace System. And we need to find ways to continue to advance that so you can keep doing what you want to do it safely and securely. And I think that just goes back to the collaboration effort where we all need to be in this together, because if we're not, if we start to fragment, or even as you pointed out, and we knew it as well with the old authorization system for airspace, people are just going to fly it anyway, right?
Yep.
So we need to find a way just to kind of keep moving forward as a community and to help folks understand why remote ID is important, why it's being implemented, and how that's going to pave the way for different things in the future. It's not just a big box company thing. We're not putting it out there just because we want to feed into the big names that are in the drone delivery business right now. It's going to be a benefit for everyone, but it's really hard for a lot of people to see that right now because it's still so new. We're still educating folks on what is standard remote ID and what is a broadcast module. And of course, we had the lack of availability of a lot of these broadcast modules that complicated things. And now you have these locations where you can fly without remote ID equipment called FRIAs, and so it's almost like we're in this rebirth of, we just rolled out part 107 and we need to explain it to people why it's there, what it means to them, how it's going to help, and how it's going to ensure the future.
Yep. And I think that's the biggest thing, is the education part of it, right? Because the technology advances so fast in the drone industry that the regulations, unfortunately, at some points have to catch up, right? And that's just the way it's been, because it's you against the world, really, in a lot of ways, right? And how fast the technology can actually advance. I mean, people are working on projects that we probably don't even know of, right? That are
Yep.
in the weeds, that are some crazy advancements in certain ways. So it is a good thing, right? We're moving it forward, and just from the safety perspective, it puts us all in a better spot. And I think that's the biggest thing, is just knowing what it is, and educating yourself, again, just like the part 107 and Lance and everything else that has come out, is knowing what is for, and why ultimately it's beneficial for everyone. But Kevin, I really appreciate you being on today, and giving us your story, and kind of transition throughout the industry. I always like to end the episodes of kind of final thoughts of like where you're going, thoughts on the industry, just kind of like what you're working on, and then putting it out there of like, who do you want to connect with, who do you want to collaborate with in the industry,
Yeah.
and how can people
Yeah,
reach out
sure.
to you?
I hope I'm not talking over you. The video kind of froze up for a second, but I look at drones and I see the future. We're starting to talk a little bit more about AAM, air taxis, the whole advanced air mobility concept, and I think that's also the future. But it's almost like we can't get to what we want to do with AAM without having drones lead the way. You're talking about the UAS traffic management initiatives that are happening now, and the work that we're doing with trying to normalize and make BVLOS an option for people per the rule, right? We had the BVLOS rulemaking committee a while back give us their final report. So we're kind of doing all these things. So to me, the real future in terms of my career, and again, a lot of gray hair, I don't have all that much time left in my career, but it's certainly going to be fun watching drones lead the way. The air taxi stuff, the AAN stuff is incredibly exciting, but almost hyper focused on the drone industry. You know, we've got Part 107. Now we've got remote ID that's out. We've enabled night operations, and we've enabled ops over people as per the rule. And we just recently revised our ops over people waiver application process to make that easier for folks to get those waivers to fly ops over people if they need to. So we're doing all these things in terms of the FAA at an incredible pace. And I think that's something I want to touch on too, because you brought it up, Cody, which is that drones are evolving and are advancing at breakneck speeds. If you look at traditional aviation, there was sort of the jet age that happened, and then it sort of just kind of kept going. We might have a little bit better engines, we might have a little bit larger aircraft, but they're still operating the same way that they have since the mid 60s and 70s. Drones almost follow the computer law, which, you know, every 6 months their capabilities almost double. I forget what the law actually is, but it's something along the terms of where I look at drone evolution much more like I do computer evolution. The phones we had in our pockets 10 years ago are nowhere near what we carry around today. And that's the same thing what's happening with drones. And so for me, watching that happen and seeing the FAA, you know, you can make an argument against it, but seeing the FAA for the most part do pretty well in keeping up with that change. Remember, we are a government agency. Rulemaking takes time. I can't believe how fast we got Part 107 out, which you know, you might have some viewers right here going, yeah, good job. You know, 2 years you finally wrote the rule. That is breakneck speed for any rule, let alone an entirely new segment of rule for an entirely new segment of aircraft, right? So I, I'm quite proud of the FAA and the way that we have been able to stay up with the drone industry. There's always going to be advancements in the drone industry that come out next week, and we're kind of scratching heads, going, "Oh, okay, all right, what's this going to be about?" But the one takeaway for me with my work is that the people we have here at the FAA that are dedicated to doing this UA stuff are really, really good people, and they're working really hard. You can throw your stereotypical government worker doesn't do anything. No, the drone groups in the FAA work extremely hard, and this is something that we have to do in order to keep up, because otherwise, folks like you that are operating drones will be so far ahead of us that your capabilities won't be usable, and that's just not acceptable. So
Yeah,
for me, the big takeaway here is I'm going to enjoy watching this industry grow, and I'm going to do my very best to make sure that we all stay in it together, that you don't have any concerns or fears of sending me an email or calling me on the phone or meeting me in person or meeting any FA in person, because we're all out here to make sure that you guys can continue to advance, serve your communities, serve your industries in a way that's safe, repeatable, and efficient, and works with everything that's about to come into our national airspace system. So this is what an incredible time to be alive, really,
for
in
sure.
aviation. This is just, it's so cool. There's very few generations that get to live through a birth of a new type of aviation. And, you know, Cody, here we are.
Here we are. I know, and we're right in the thick of it too. I think you know, it's only really to start to ramp up like crazy. In an industry that is in a lot of ways, you know, just past its true potential. So, or infancy potential, I should say. It's amazing to see how fast it's come in less than 2 decades, right? So
Yeah.
it's wild, for sure. But again, Kevin, I appreciate you being on today. You know, sharing your stories and making us learn a little bit more about how you've kind of come to where you are today. So I appreciate you being on, and everybody else out there, safe flying, and we'll see you
Yeah.
on the next one.
My pleasure. My pleasure, Cody.
Thanks, Kevin.